Hey guys, it's Christy and welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for joining me. Today we're going to be looking back at the holiday releases from 2020. So before we get into it, I hope you'll consider subscribing to my channel before you leave. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoy, and let's get into it. I recently did a video like this one, but looking back at last year's holiday releases, and I just thought it was really fun looking back, so I thought let's just look at 2020 also. Let's just hop right into it. The first one, which kind of inspires a bit of a what were they thinking moment, was from Marc Jacobs, and this is the Very Merry Cherry collection. So I remember seeing this one come out, and of course Marc Jacobs isn't a makeup brand anymore. They're still making fragrance, but they're not making makeup. I don't know if they're gonna come back. I have no idea. But I remember seeing these and I was just completely not interested. The whole cherry thing just did not capture my interest. I do really like the Marc Jacobs lipsticks, but I just remember seeing this one, and I know some people thought it was so cute, but in my mind it was going to be a hard pass for me. But I do remember this one. And that same year, Pat McGrath released the Celestial Divinity palette, and I think this is the first time she released one of her mega palettes for holiday. So this one was very purple based, and it also came with 3 different quads, some lipsticks, and from what I remember, I heard a lot of people saying that this was very reminiscent of her earlier Star Wars collab, and it actually did encompass 2 of those palettes in this larger one. So I thought that was very interesting. I think quite a few people liked this one, but it wasn't the most popular, I don't think. I think this year's was much more well liked than that one. The thing that I will mention about her big mega palettes is that I do not feel like she puts enough mattes in there. I mean, you can certainly create an all shimmer look if you want to, or you can bring in another palette, but I just feel like I would like her mega palette so much more if she threw in more mattes. I feel like that's what would do it for me. But otherwise, I did hear really great things about these quads. Some of them still catch my attention every time I'm browsing or whenever she's having a sale. So I do kind of look at those, but that big palette is the one I remember the most. And I will mention, 2020 was a year that it was weird for all of us, and I did not pick up a lot of holiday releases that year. So I do not have a lot of these, but the next one I actually do. And this is the Hourglass palette for holiday, and this is the Sculpture palette. I still have mine, of course, and this is what mine looks like. And the reason I haven't bought one since is because this just doesn't have enough use out of it. The powders do have a lot of use. The highlight is a little too deep for me. The bronzer I love, and the blushes are gorgeous, but I just don't feel like I get enough use out of this palette to justify purchasing another one. I keep wanting to purchase another one to even just review. This year I really wanted the Elephant palette, but I haven't used this one nearly enough to justify that. So for that reason, I did not pick up this year's, but that was the first year that I invested in an Hourglass face palette, and I still really like it. I think it was a good one. Okay, I didn't realize this one was for holiday, but this was the Natasha Denona Trio Chrome palette. So I was originally going to talk about the Glam palette, which I love, but that one was definitely released before this one. So this one, being much closer to holiday, was the Trio Chrome eyeshadow palette, and I did not pick this one up. This is one of her large palettes that retails for $129. These are just bold shades that I am not going to use in it. It's not going to be worth it for me to invest that much. Not a lot of people loved this one. I feel like maybe some people really did, but she called it the Trio Chrome palette and only had 3 Trio Chromes. And I know her Trio Chrome shades do not do what an indie shadow does. So I don't know. I don't think this was her most successful. From Charlotte Tilbury, we had the Bejeweled Eyes to Hypnotize. So this is one that I skipped on, and I still think about picking it up sometimes, but they actually had this one on a buy one get one free sale this year, which kind of leads me to believe that it was just not a bestseller if they're really trying to get rid of stock. So I thought that was really interesting. I thought this was a beautiful palette. I personally love Charlotte's 12 pan eyeshadow palettes. I think they're so beautiful. I think the quality is so good, and I think they're a way better value than her quads. Again, I was so sad that she didn't release one for holiday this year, but I do think that's a really pretty palette. But I definitely did not hear it get talked about very often after holiday, which I guess is kind of typical, but it's for a palette that's still available. I don't know. So I just thought that was interesting. A palette I still hear talked about a lot from holiday 2020 was the Huda Beauty Naughty Nude palette. So Huda releases one of her large palettes every year in either September, October for the holiday season. This year it was the Empowered palette, which I passed on. Last year it was Rose Quartz, which I'm so glad I picked up. And the year before it was Naughty Nude. This is one that still does get my attention from time to time and I still think about. But this was also the first year she released that really weird bacteria looking shade, and that definitely got people talking. So definitely had the intent that she meant for it to. It's also in the Rose Quartz and I have not touched it. It just makes me feel weird. But I still look at this palette all the time because it still catches my eye. It still looks really pretty. And I know the formula of her larger palettes is so good. And the textures, she does something with texture that is definitely very unique to Huda. You don't get it in her 9 pans, but in her larger palettes, she experiments with texture in such a way that really gets my attention and that really makes her palette stand out and be unique. So I will say that this one definitely still gets my attention and I still hear people talking about it. So that's what tells me this was a pretty big hit from holiday. So it looks like Natasha Denona actually had another release close to holiday for 2020, and this included the Super Nudes highlighter, some lipsticks, and the mini Zendo palette. So I did not pick up the Super Nude highlighter or the lipsticks, but the mini Zendo was really the star of the show. And it's just not my favorite mini. It's fine. It's actually quite pretty to look at, but it's really not as intuitive for me as I would like it to be. It's just a little harder for me to figure out what kind of look I want to do. So for that reason, this just really isn't a favorite of mine. I've heard a lot of people say good things about it. It's not been my favorite, especially of her minis. So it was a pretty collection, but not my favorite. And Rare Beauty also released the Confident Energy eyeshadow palette. So 2 very colorful little palettes. I actually have one of them. I have Magnetic Spirit, and this does look really, really pretty. It's definitely especially beautiful for this time of year or even just for fall with the jewel tones. I think it's very pretty. These shades are all shimmery, so it's definitely more of a companion palette for me personally, and I don't reach for it for that reason. However, the formula in here is actually so beautiful. So beautiful. These shimmers, metallics are so lovely and the formula is great. It's just not what I reach for that often because it's a companion. So for me, it's not a favorite, but it's still a really nice palette. Oh, Too Faced. Okay, so Too Faced, this was the year they released their pumpkin spice palette. So the previous 2 years, I think they had the gingerbread palette and something else. They released the pumpkin spice palette in 2020. This is a lovely palette. Really, really pretty. Love the color story. I love how it's lighter on one side and deeper on the other. I think that's wonderful. It does smell a little bit like pumpkin spice. The purple shimmers are a little bit chunky, which I don't love, but I think this is a really pretty palette. They also released 4 of their mini palettes as well. I don't hear these talked about much at all. I do believe I have the Salted Caramel, but otherwise, I just do not hear these spoken about very often, and that's pretty much it. I just don't hear anybody talk about these. Okay, this was a bit of a weird year for Anastasia as well. So the previous year was the year they released so much and everybody kind of got burnt out. And then I think they had a release in January of 2020, and by that point everyone was like, okay, I'm tired of this. And so they pretty much did not release anything for the entire year of 2020. Of course, we had COVID, but they did release the mini Soft Glam, which I thought was kind of an interesting choice. I do think it looks really, really pretty. Soft Glam is definitely one of my favorites from the brand, so I thought that was interesting. And then they also had vaults, so you could buy Sultry or you could get Soft Glam and it would come with an eyeliner and a couple other things. This is actually when I picked up Sultry and I love that one. So I thought that was interesting, but this is definitely a year where I felt like they were kind of grasping to come out with a holiday collection. So I thought that was interesting. But since then, they've definitely come back. Last year was the Primrose. This year was Rose Metals. And that is it. So those are the most notable holiday releases from 2020. Let me know down below if I missed any or if you are still loving any of these. Let me know. I love hearing from you guys so much. If you're new here, I hope you'll consider subscribing before you go. I do upload at least 3 new videos every single week. Thank you again so very much for watching, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!